I never expected my marriage to take such a devastating turn. If someone had told me 5 years ago that Lila, the woman I married and loved more than anything in the world, would eventually feel like a complete stranger, a stranger I couldn't trust, I would have thought they were out of their mind. Yet, here I am, haunted by every detail, every red flag I brushed aside, every moment I ignored because I wasn't ready to face the harsh reality. I suppose I was naive to think people remain the same. It all started off so subtly. You don't just wake up one day and realize your wife is cheating on you. No, it creeps in slowly, almost imperceptibly. I thought we were simply going through a rough patch. After all, everyone says marriage requires hard work, right? But deep down, I knew this wasn't normal. Lila began coming home late more often. At first, she claimed it was just work. Being a photographer, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt regarding her irregular hours and her so-called inspiration trips. "Another shoot," she would say, flashing that effortless smile, the same one that used to lift my spirits. But as time went on, her excuses became more frequent and too well rehearsed. One evening, she returned home reeking of perfume that definitely wasn't hers. Something sweeter, something more luxurious. I attempted to brush it off, but an unsettling feeling began to fester inside me. A gnawing sense of dread that refused to leave. Then there was Caleb, my younger brother. I should have been more vigilant. Caleb has always been the kind of guy who takes what he wants without a second thought. Growing up, he had this cocky grin that made people perceive him as charming. He had a knack for making you feel small, as if your sole purpose was to be outshone by him. Perhaps that's why it took me so long to recognize the truth that was right in front of me. I didn't want to accept it. I didn't want to believe that Caleb was hovering around my wife. At first, I dismissed my suspicions as paranoia. After all, they were close in age, and Lila had always appreciated his playful spirit. Caleb knew how to charm people, especially women. But then the flirting escalated. Initially, it was just small gestures. A hand resting on her lower back, a cheeky wink across the room. They shared inside jokes that excluded me, and when I confronted her, she would roll her eyes dismissively. "Come on, Derek. You know how Caleb is. He's just being friendly." But it felt far from friendly. Felt like a challenge. The worst part? He didn't even bother to conceal it. He'd flirt right in front of me, as if daring me to speak up. Maybe that was his strategy. He knew I wasn't one to confront others head-on. He knew I'd swallow my pride and act as if everything was fine. That's always been my flaw. I let things slide, thinking they'd eventually resolve themselves. One night, I returned home early from work. Something inside me urged me to. I pulled into the driveway and paused for a moment to collect my thoughts. From the garage, I could hear their laughter drifting through the thin walls. It wasn't just any laughter. It was intimate, the kind that envelopes two people, blocking out the rest of the world. My chest tightened, and for a fleeting moment, I contemplated bursting in and catching them in the act. But I didn't. I remained seated like a coward, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned pale. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe Caleb was simply visiting. Maybe they were reminiscing about the past. But the seed of doubt had been planted. A splinter in my mind I couldn't remove. I stepped inside the house, forcing a smile. Lila looked taken aback to see me. "Oh, hey, you're home early?" she chirped, her tone too bright, too rehearsed. Caleb just beamed, as if he were privy to a secret I wasn't. "Brother, join us. We were just catching up." I felt an overwhelming urge to punch him in the face. Instead, I nodded and retreated upstairs, leaving them in their little bubble. Later that night, after Lila had fallen asleep, I did something I never thought I would resort to. I checked her phone. I convinced myself it was just paranoia, but deep down, I knew what I was searching for. Initially, I found nothing, just the usual messages from friends and work-related chats. But then I stumbled upon him, Caleb. She had saved his number under a ridiculous nickname, Little Devil. My stomach churned as I sifted through their message history. Late-night texts, memes, inside jokes. And then I found the message that shattered whatever trust one had left. Thanks for the amazing night. I wish I could do this with you every day. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. My hands trembled so much that I almost dropped the phone. I felt nauseous, furious, betrayed. But more than anything, I felt like a fool for not recognizing the signs earlier, for allowing them to carry on right under my nose. I didn't confront her then. Not yet. I needed more evidence. I had to understand just how deep this betrayal ran. So, I bided my time, pretending everything was fine, pretending I was oblivious. But I began observing her more closely, tracking her every move. I even resorted to downloading a spy app onto her phone, something I never imagined I would stoop to. But desperate times call for desperate measures, right? And let me tell you, the things I discovered, it was far worse than I had anticipated. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was reveling in it. Lila and Caleb were meeting up in hotels, sneaking around like teenagers consumed by desire. They joked about how close they came to being caught, how thrilling it was to betray me behind my back. Lila even bought new lingerie for him, things I had never seen her wear for me. She stashed it away in a drawer I never opened, as if that would shield it from discovery. Every time I looked at her after that, all I could envision was them together. Her in that black lace with Caleb's hands roaming all over her. The most painful twist? A few weeks after I discovered the texts, Caleb invited me to a party at a friend's house. I went, hoping I could maintain some semblance of normalcy, but all I could do was watch them. I noticed the way they exchanged glances when they thought no one was paying attention. At one point, I saw Caleb sneak off to the bathroom, phone in hand. Moments later, I heard Lila's phone buzz in her purse. I knew what that buzz meant before even checking it. Later that night, while Lila was in the shower, I took her phone again. Sure enough, another text from Caleb popped up. Can't stop thinking about you. I miss your body. I clutched the phone so tightly it felt like it might snap in my grip. It was as if I were drowning, with each breath becoming more painful than the last. But I kept my mouth shut, at least for the moment. I understood that this wasn't something that could be resolved with an argument or an apology. I needed a strategy, a way to make them both pay for their betrayal. And I was determined to take my time with it. Finding those messages felt like someone had pulled a trapdoor from beneath me. I wasn't standing on solid ground anymore. I was plunging into an endless abyss of betrayal. The worst part was that they believed they were clever, that I'd never catch on to what they were doing. Little did they know who they were dealing with. I wasn't about to confront them like a fool, shouting about honor. No, I was going to make them pay quietly and methodically. The first step was the spy app. I installed it on Lila's phone one evening while she was in the shower, humming away as if everything was fine. It took only a few minutes, simple software disguised as a generic app. It granted me access to everything. Her messages, her GPS location, even her microphone whenever I wanted to eavesdrop. Every notification that appeared on her phone now popped up on mine, like a shadow trailing her. I hated that it had come to this, but I couldn't let her slip away without knowing every sordid detail. And the details were worse than I had imagined. The texts were explicit, like reading softcore porn featuring two people I once trusted. Caleb was graphic, sending her vivid descriptions of what he'd do to her the next time they were together. How much he missed the way she screamed his name. Lila didn't hold back either. She told him how thrilled she felt thinking about him, how alive she felt in his presence. They even mocked me. How clueless I was, how exhilarating it was to betray me behind my back. I couldn't tear myself away from the screen. I loathed every moment of it, yet I couldn't look away. It was as if I needed to absorb the full weight of their betrayal, to etch it into my memory so I'd never forget. I wanted to remember every word they exchanged, every time they laughed at my expense as if I were nothing. One message struck me hard. Caleb had texted, "Can't wait for this weekend, babe. Same hotel, just us, no interruptions. It's going to be perfect." That's when it hit me. This wasn't a mere fling. It was a full-blown affair. They had routines, traditions. They had done this so many times they even had a favorite hotel. My jaw clenched, but I forced myself to remain composed. Anger wouldn't help me. I needed to be strategic. When Lila mentioned she had a work event that weekend and would be staying overnight, I smiled and replied, "Of course. I've got plenty of work to catch up on anyway." She kissed me on the cheek, as if nothing was amiss, as if she weren't about to run off to sleep with my brother. The following morning, I hired a private investigator named Sam, an older guy with a weathered face that suggested he had seen too much in his time. I didn't share every detail. I only provided enough information. "Follow her," I instructed. "I need photos, videos, whatever you can get. Discreetly." Sam gave me a knowing look, as if he understood exactly what I was asking without needing further explanation. "Don't worry," he assured me. "I've handled situations like this before." When the weekend rolled around, I watched Lila pack a small suitcase with her favorite outfits. She even slipped that black lace lingerie into a side pocket. My stomach twisted, but I maintained a neutral expression. She kissed me goodbye with the same casual affection she might show a friend and then walked out the door without a second glance. Once she was gone, I tracked her location through the app. Sure enough, she was en route to the hotel, an upscale little spot just outside the city. Caleb's GPS signal was already there, waiting for her. I clenched my fists, but I didn't call or text. Instead, I waited for Sam's updates to roll in. A few hours later, the photos started arriving. The first few were innocuous enough. Lila and Caleb checking in at the front desk, grinning like a couple on vacation. Then there were shots of them walking hand in hand to their room, looking more like newlyweds than two people engaged in deceit. But the ones that hit hardest were the ones taken through the window of their hotel room. Sam had found the perfect vantage point. I saw them undressing each other. I watched Caleb lift her onto the bed. The images were grainy, but the betrayal was undeniably clear. I stared at those photos for what felt like an eternity. There was no coming back from this. Any lingering hope that I was wrong, that I could still believe Lila was the woman I married, had been extinguished. But my quest for evidence wasn't over. I needed more, everything. I wanted to uncover every sordid detail they thought they could conceal from me. That's when I decided to involve Tara Jenkins. Tara was Lila's best friend, a woman who always seemed to be in the loop, perhaps more than she should be. I suspected she was aware of the affair, but for whatever reason, she hadn't come clean to me. Maybe she didn't want to get tangled in the mess, or maybe she thought she was shielding Lila. Regardless, I needed her to spill the truth, or at least get her on my side. I set up a casual meeting with her at a local bar. When I texted her out of the blue to ask if she wanted to grab a drink, she thought nothing of it. "Just catching up," I casually said. She accepted without hesitation. That evening, we met, and I ensured that the drinks kept flowing. Tara became more animated after a couple of cocktails, laughing easily, but I could see the unease flickering in her eyes whenever Lila or Caleb came up in conversation. It was evident she was withholding something. Her reluctance was palpable. "Come on, Tara," I urged after her third drink. "We're friends, right? If something's going on, you can trust me." She shifted in her seat, biting her lip nervously. "Derek, I really don't want to get involved. It's not my place." I leaned in closer, lowering my voice conspiratorially. "I already know, Tara. I just need you to confirm it. Please." That seemed to break her defenses. Tara's shoulders slumped as she stared down into her drink, swirling the ice as if it held all the answers. "I didn't want to be the one to tell you," she whispered. "But yeah, they've been seeing each other. For months." Hearing her confirm, it was like getting gut-punched all over again. Yet I maintained my composure. I couldn't afford to crumble now. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, keeping my tone steady, though it dripped with coldness. Tara shook her head, guilt washing over her features. "I thought maybe Lila would end it on her own. I didn't want to be the one to blow everything up." "Well," I replied, raising my glass in a mock toast, "consider it blown." Tara offered me a sad smile, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy for her. But then I remembered her allegiance, who she chose to protect, and any compassion I had vanished. I left that bar with everything I needed. The photos, the texts, and Tara's confirmation. Doubt was no longer an option, and forgiveness was off the table. It was time to advance to the next stage of my plan. I knew confronting Lila and Caleb right away wouldn't suffice. If I barged in, hurling accusations, all I'd receive in return would be insincere apologies and a few tears. Maybe some half-hearted attempts at explanations. It wouldn't change anything. I wasn't looking for closure. I wanted to strike them where it hurt, deep in the pit of their regrets. Caleb had always taken whatever he wanted, women, opportunities, and the spotlight without a second thought. It was time for someone to take something from him. That's when I thought of Tess Harris. Tess was Caleb's ex, and I suspected she still had lingering feelings for him. Their breakup had left her bitter and resentful, and I had a hunch she'd relish the chance to even the score. All she needed was a little nudge, and I was more than willing to provide it. I shot her a late-night message, the kind that feels spontaneous but is meticulously planned. "Hey Tess, long time no see. I know you were with Caleb. We need to talk." Her response came within minutes. "Derek? What's this about?" I let her sit in suspense for a bit before replying. "It's about Caleb and Lila. Can you meet me tomorrow?" The typing bubbles appeared almost instantly. "Lila? You mean your wife Lila?" "Yeah, just meet me tomorrow. I'll fill you in." I left it at that, confident she would come. She was probably lying in bed, spinning wild scenarios in her mind. She despised being left in the dark, and if there was even a whisper of scandal involving Caleb, she wouldn't be able to resist. The next evening, we met at a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town. The kind of place where no one pays attention to who's with whom, and the bartenders keep their noses out of it. Tess showed up looking just as I remembered, long auburn hair, sharp features, and a wounded energy masked by bright lipstick and a revealing blouse. "Derek," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "What's going on? Why did you ask me here?" I gave her a slow, casual smile, as if this was merely a friendly catch-up. "Let's not jump to conclusions, Tess. How about we start with a drink?" She frowned but acquiesced, allowing me to order us a couple of whiskeys. I could sense her eagerness to get to the point, but I made her wait. We sipped our drinks, discussing trivial matters, work, old memories, people we once knew. I kept the atmosphere light, disarming. She was wary at first, but as the whiskey took effect, I watched her begin to relax. "So," she said, leaning forward, her expression sharpening with curiosity. "What's this about Caleb and Lila?" I let out a low chuckle, knowing she would bite. "I figured you'd want to know." Her head tilted slightly, and I could see her anticipation building. "Caleb and Lila are having an affair," I said bluntly, without hesitation. No sugarcoating, just the brutal truth dropped between us like a heavy stone. For a moment, Tess sat frozen, her mind racing to catch up with what I just revealed. "You're serious?" she finally managed to whisper, disbelief creeping into her voice. "Absolutely." I took a deliberate sip of my drink, watching as shock morphed into anger and hurt, all flickering across her face like the frames of a tragic film. "That bastard," she muttered under her breath, gripping her glass so tightly I feared it might crack. "I knew it all along." Of course, she didn't actually know it. People like Tess often cling to the fantasy that they had suspicions all along, just to feel a bit more in control. I leaned in closer, dropping my voice to a conspiratorial hush. "I thought you'd want to be in the loop. Given how things ended with you and Caleb, I figured this would matter to you." Her expression twisted between disbelief and fury. "He's with your wife? What kind of lowlife does that?" I offered her a wry smile. "That's Caleb for you. Always going after what doesn't belong to him." Tess slammed her glass onto the table, whiskey spilling over the edge. "I can't believe this. I spent years with him, and now he's off screwing someone else like I never existed." That was the moment I had been waiting for. Her anger was one thing, but humiliation was another, and that kind of feeling drives people to do things they wouldn't normally consider. "Listen," I said, keeping my tone steady and calm. "I get it. I've been burned by Caleb too. But maybe, Just maybe we can turn this situation around. She looked at me skeptically. What are you getting at? I leaned back in my chair, letting her intrigue pull her in. What if we stop playing the victim? What if we take back some of the power they've stripped from us? Tess arched an eyebrow, her interest piqued. How do you propose we do that? I took a slow, thoughtful sip of my drink before answering. By giving Caleb a taste of his own medicine. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion creeping in. What exactly are you suggesting, Derek? I let the silence stretch, letting the tension build before I spoke again. Let's get even. Make him feel what we've felt. And maybe it'll help you heal. Tess sat in silence for a long moment, chewing on her lip, her mind racing through the possibilities. I could see it, the flicker of realization that this was her chance to reclaim some of the dignity Caleb had stripped away from her. A chance to hurt him as he had hurt her. And what's in it for you? She asked finally, her tone sharp. I allowed a small, humorless smile to break through. I get the satisfaction of watching them both fall apart. Tess took a deep breath, swirling the whiskey in her glass as if trying to make sense of it all. You're really serious about this, aren't you? Completely. For a moment, I feared she might back out. But then something shifted in her demeanor. An ember of determination sparked to life. She lifted her glass, signaling a silent agreement. All right, she said. Let's do it. We clinked glasses, sealing our twisted agreement. As we sat there, finishing our drinks in a companionable silence, I couldn't help but feel a dark thrill coursing through me. Tess thought she was reclaiming her power, but what she didn't realize was that she was merely another pawn in my game. A piece in a chess match that Caleb and Lila had no idea they were part of yet. Tess was already in my grasp, like a chess piece waiting for its next move. Every moment we spent together, every conversation, was designed to deepen her entanglement in my scheme. I gave her exactly what she craved. Someone who listened, someone who understood the ache that Caleb had left behind. I mirrored her pain, nodding along as she recounted memories of him. The more we shared, the more she convinced herself that I was the only one who truly understood her plight. It didn't take long for Tess to grow emotionally invested. Late-night texts began, first just venting about Caleb, angry rants about how he had wronged her. But soon, our conversations shifted. She started asking about my life, my relationship with Lila, and how I was coping with the betrayal we both faced. I kept my responses balanced, not too eager, not too aloof, just vulnerable enough to draw her in. I feel like I'm drowning some days, I would tell her, whether over text or during our whiskey-laden chats at the bar. Like there's no way out. Tess absorbed it all, her responses growing longer and increasingly affectionate. I know what you mean, she'd say. It's like, no one else gets it, but you do. One night, she leaned in closer, her hand brushing my arm as she whispered, You deserve so much better than her, Derek. You really do. That was the moment I decided to kiss her. It wasn't passionate, not yet. It was a careful, calculated move. A small taste of what was to come, just enough to ignite a spark without revealing the strings I was pulling. She responded eagerly, desperate for the feeling of being wanted again. But every action I took was part of a larger strategy, each touch meticulously placed to lure her deeper into my game. Before long, Tess and I were no longer just meeting at the bar. We started spending nights together, first at my place, then at hers. She believed she was regaining control over her life by being with me, but what she didn't realize was that she was becoming another weapon in my arsenal, an asset I could use to dismantle Caleb bit by bit. In the meantime, Caleb seemed to sense the shift in the air. He ramped up his communication with Lila, bombarding her with texts and calls at odd hours, questioning her whereabouts and who she was with. The tension between them intensified, seeping into their secret affair like a toxic gas. Caleb thrived on the thrill of possession, and now that he felt his grip slipping, the stakes were getting higher. One evening, Lila returned home late, frustration etched across her features. Caleb's acting strange, she said, tossing her shoes aside. He's different. I can't put my finger on it. I shrugged, playing the clueless husband. Maybe he's just dealing with a lot. She didn't respond, but I could see the worry creeping into her eyes. The cracks in their relationship were widening. Caleb was becoming more possessive and demanding, and Lila was starting to feel trapped. She had no idea that I was the puppeteer, orchestrating everything from behind the curtain. The next phase involved orchestrating a meeting between Caleb and Tess, a chance encounter designed to ignite old feelings and send him spiraling. I chose a bar I knew Caleb favored, a place he and Tess had frequented during their relationship. "Tess," I said, leaning in with intent, "it's time to remind Caleb what he lost." She hesitated for a moment, but I could see the desire burning in her eyes, the urge to prove she was still desirable, still capable of making Caleb want her. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "Just be yourself," I replied. "Let him see what he's missing." The plan unfolded flawlessly. Tess and I arrived at the bar together, but I hung back, letting her walk in alone. Caleb was already there, nursing a drink, his gaze scanning the room like a predator searching for prey. When his eyes landed on Tess, I noticed his expression change. First surprise, then a shadow of something darker. "Tess," he said, flashing that charming smile that had always worked in his favor. "Didn't expect to see you here." She smiled back, slipping effortlessly into her role. "Caleb, it's been a while." They engaged in small talk, catching up, flirting in that shallow, rehearsed way people do when trying to reclaim something that's long gone. I remained outside, watching through the window, waiting for the moment when Caleb would start to crack. It didn't take long. Tess leaned in, whispering something into his ear, and I caught the flicker of frustration cross his face, the painful realization that she was now beyond his reach. Later that night, after Tess and I left the bar, she turned to me, a mixture of triumph and uncertainty in her expression. "What now?" she asked. I gave her a slow, knowing smile, fully aware of what was next. "We're going to have sex," I said, "in Caleb's apartment." Her eyes widened, but beneath the shock, I could see the thrill. She craved this, wanted to reclaim her power, to make Caleb feel the same pain he had inflicted on her. And I wasn't about to hold her back. The following evening, we ventured to Caleb's apartment while he was at work. Tess hesitated at the door, her nerves evident, but I offered a reassuring smile. "This is how you take back control," I whispered. Once inside, we made sure to leave remnants of our presence everywhere. Tessa's earrings were left on the nightstand, a bottle of her perfume placed deliberately on the dresser, and my belt buckle was carelessly tossed in a corner. Each item served as a breadcrumb, a tiny piece of evidence that would drive Caleb into a frenzy when he stumbled upon them. When we finally collapsed into Caleb's bed, Tess was frantic, almost desperate, her hands gripping me as if I were her lifeline. I let her believe she was in charge, guiding her movements. But every kiss, every thrust, was a calculated step in my revenge. Afterward, as we lay intertwined in the sheets, Tess rested her head on my chest, her fingers tracing idle patterns on my skin. "Do you think he'll find out?" she asked, her voice laced with drowsiness and satisfaction. I kissed the top of her head, a slow smile playing on my lips. "Oh, he'll find out," I whispered. "That's the whole point." Back at home, Lila was becoming increasingly suspicious. Caleb's possessiveness was wearing her down, and she started to suspect that I knew more than I let on. She'd ask probing questions, testing my reactions, but I always delivered the same calm, measured responses. One night, as we lay in bed, she turned to me, her voice barely a whisper. "Derek, do you ever feel like something's off?" I smiled in the dark, fully aware that the web I had spun was tightening around all of them. "No," I said softly, brushing a stray hair from her face. "Everything's just as it should be." The night we chose for Caleb's downfall felt charged, like an electric storm ready to erupt. I could see it in Tess too, her excitement barely contained, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her skirt, her lip nervously tucked between her teeth. She glanced at me as we pulled up to Caleb's building, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features. "You sure about this?" she asked, her voice low and hesitant. I reached over and squeezed her thigh, my perfected cold smile spreading across my face. Absolutely. This is where it all concludes. We slipped into Caleb's apartment with ease. He was as predictable as ever. No deadbolts, no cameras. Just the arrogance of a man who thought he was untouchable. Tess hesitated briefly but quickly followed me inside. I sensed her nervousness, but the thrill of the moment urged her onward. We left behind traces of ourselves everywhere, just enough to toy with his mind. Tess dropped her earrings on the nightstand, her perfume lingering in the air like a taunting reminder. I scattered my clothes across the floor, my belt buckle glinting under the bed as if we had been too caught up in the moment to care where our belongings landed. Every item was placed with meticulous intention. Then we made love in Caleb's bed. Tess was frantic, as if possessed by the need to validate something. Not just to Caleb, but to herself. I allowed her to dictate the pace, letting her believe she was in control, but every movement I made was intentional. I was the one steering the ship, even when it didn't appear that way. In the heat of the moment, while Tessa's breaths came in ragged gasps, I snatched her phone from the bedside table. I quickly typed out the message I had been crafting for weeks, my fingers moving swiftly across the screen. Come home. I need to see you. I hit send and placed the phone back down, the trap now fully set. Tess was oblivious, lost in the moment, her nails digging into my back as if trying to anchor herself in something solid. I couldn't help but smile, knowing everything was finally aligning perfectly. Caleb arrived sooner than I anticipated. The front door clicked open, followed by the heavy thud of his boots on the hardwood floor. Tess stiffened beneath me, her breath hitching as his footsteps approached. What the hell? Caleb roared from the doorway, disbelief and rage contorting his face as he took in the scene. Tess tangled in the sheets and me, his own brother, looking back at him with a calm, calculated smile. Tess locked eyes with Caleb, and in that instant, I saw a complex mix of emotions in her gaze. Triumph, heartbreak, perhaps even a hint of satisfaction. She had achieved what she wanted. For the first time in his life, Caleb looked utterly defeated. I leaned back, unfazed by the fury emanating from him. You took what was mine, I stated, my voice steady and deliberate. So I took what was yours. The impact of my words hit him like a physical blow. Caleb lunged toward me, fists clenched, but I was ready. I stood up slowly, dressing with an infuriating calm, as if I had all the time in the world. Tess screamed for him to stop, but it was pointless. He swung wildly, his fist grazing my shoulder, but I barely flinched. I straightened my collar, glanced back at him one last time, and grinned. Enjoy the rest of your night, little brother. With that, I walked out, leaving Caleb standing there, naked, betrayed, and utterly broken. When I got home, Lila was already waiting for me, tension radiating from her like a palpable force. I noticed how she kept glancing at her phone, as if anticipating some catastrophe. I closed the door behind me, and she turned to face me, her expression guarded. Derek? She began, but I interrupted her with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. I know, Lila, I said softly. I know everything. Her face drained of color, and she staggered back a step. I can explain. I pulled out my phone, the damning photos of her and Caleb already queued up. I watched her expression shatter as she scrolled through them, each image hitting her like a punch. Now you know what betrayal feels like, I whispered. Lila collapsed onto the couch, sobbing into her hands, but I felt no sympathy. She tried calling Caleb, but I knew he wouldn't pick up. He was drowning in guilt, just as I had planned. I could almost picture him in his wrecked apartment, staring at the debris of his life, realizing too late that he had lost everything. Lila pleaded with me to talk, to forgive her, but I was done being the understanding husband. The very next day, I filed for divorce, ensuring the papers left her with nothing. Every joint account drained, every asset locked in my name. I wasn't merely ending our marriage. I was erasing her from my existence. The last time I saw her, she stood on the curb outside our old house, clutching a duffel bag with nowhere to go. She tried calling Caleb one last time, but his phone went straight to voicemail. He was finished with her, just like I was. And me? I was free. That night, I stood before the bathroom mirror, scrutinizing my reflection. The man looking back at me was no longer the hopeful spouse who had walked into that marriage, dreaming of a happy ending. I didn't recognize him anymore. But for the first time in a long while I smiled, and it felt exhilarating.